Every soul is born into a story already in motion, a story woven by generations that came before. The home we enter is not merely a shelter of walls and warmth. It is also a field of invisible energies, memories, fears, and unhealed wounds that shape our sense of self long before we even speak. The child absorbs not just love, but also silence, not just protection, but projection. In the shadows of our parents' pain, we learn how to survive, often mistaking survival for love itself. When a parent carries unhealed trauma, their inner wounds echo through the way they speak, react, and nurture. The child becomes both witness and healer, unconsciously attempting to fix what was never theirs to mend. Many grow up believing their worth is tied to keeping peace, pleasing others, or staying invisible. But to truly live, to truly be free, one must return these invisible burdens to where they belong. Healing begins when awareness dawns, when you recognize that what felt personal was often ancestral. The anger that burned you wasn't always yours. The guilt that haunted you wasn't born within you. The emotional chaos was a language of pain passed down through generations that didn't know how to translate their suffering into understanding. To survive your parents' unhealed trauma, you must first stop identifying with it. You must see it as energy, ancient, unfinished, seeking resolution. You are not here to repeat their story. You are here to rewrite it with consciousness. Forgiveness in this sense is not approval, it's liberation. You free yourself by refusing to carry the emotional weight that never belonged to you. The path is not easy. It requires the courage to face what was hidden, to look with compassion at the brokenness that shaped your family. Healing is not rebellion, it is evolution. It is saying, the pain stops with me. When you choose to understand rather than absorb, to observe rather than react, you become the bridge between the past and a future untouched by repetition. In that sacred choice, you break the cycle before it breaks you. You transform inherited wounds into wisdom, and you discover that beneath the layers of pain, your soul was never damaged, only waiting for you to remember its light. Every child enters the world as an open field, pure and untouched, ready to receive the first imprints of life. Yet from the very beginning, the child absorbs more than care and affection. They inherit the emotional climate of their parents, the silent echoes of past experiences that were never healed or expressed. Love becomes intertwined with pain, and the patterns of survival within the parent slowly become the blueprint of the child's emotional world. The mother's anxieties, the father's silence, the tension in the home all become unspoken teachers, shaping how the child learns to exist, connect, and protect themselves. What often goes unnoticed is that this inheritance is not conscious. It seeps through gestures, tones, and the invisible atmosphere of the family. A parent who never felt safe may unconsciously teach their child to live in vigilance. A parent who was never allowed to express emotions might raise a child who learns to suppress their own. In this way, the unhealed stories of one generation silently script the next. The child, in their innocence, confuses adaptation for love, believing that to be accepted, they must mirror the emotional wounds of those who raised them. Many people grow up carrying the emotional fingerprints of their parents, mistaking those energies as their own. The anger that rises without clear reason, the fear of abandonment, the constant need to prove worth, often these emotions belong to an older narrative. The child unconsciously takes on the parent's unfinished story, hoping to earn love by healing it. But this love is not freedom. It is bondage disguised as devotion. The very patterns meant to protect the child in early life become chains that tighten with age, keeping them trapped in a script they never chose to write. This invisible inheritance affects how we love, trust, and even how we see ourselves. A parent who loved through control may teach that love requires surrendering autonomy. A parent who withheld affection may condition the child to chase love endlessly. Each wound becomes a mirror reflecting what was missing, and without awareness, the child continues the same dance, seeking in others the healing that was denied at home. What feels like choice is often repetition, and what feels like love is often a replay of pain disguised as belonging. Yet, within this inherited pain lies an invitation, a quiet call to awaken. The moment you begin to see the pattern, something ancient within you stirs. You realize that you are not the pain you carry, but the consciousness observing it. You see your parents not as enemies of your peace, but as souls burdened by their own history, shaped by forces they could not name or understand. Their silence, their anger, their distance, all were languages of survival. They did not know how to love freely because no one showed them how, and now, through you, the story can change. Recognizing inherited trauma does not mean rejecting where you came from. It means understanding it with compassion. It means acknowledging that love and pain have often been intertwined in human history, that generations before you loved with the tools they had, even if those tools caused harm. When you see this, you no longer carry the wound as identity. You hold it as wisdom. You learn to love without fear, to express without apology, to give without losing yourself. Every generation has its chance to end the repetition. Awareness is the bridge that transforms inheritance into freedom. You are not bound to become what hurt you. You are the turning point in your lineage, the moment when the unspoken becomes understood, and the inherited pain finally meets the light of consciousness. Through your awareness, the silent suffering of the past finds its voice, and what was once a cycle of survival becomes the beginning of true love. Much of what we feel and struggle with in life does not entirely belong to us. Beneath our surface emotions lies a quiet inheritance, the unresolved fears, shames, and griefs of those who came before. This unseen weight often disguises itself as personal failure or weakness, yet it is not truly ours. It is ancestral pain seeking acknowledgement, an emotional echo passed down through generations that never had the chance to be fully expressed or understood. Every sigh left unspoken by an ancestor, every secret buried in silence, lives on as energy within the family line, waiting to be felt and transformed. From an early age, we absorb not only our parents' love, but also their unhealed emotions. A child feels what the parent suppresses. When a parent carries hidden shame or unresolved loss, the child, attuned to their energy, instinctively takes it in, hoping to restore harmony. The child senses emotional imbalance like a vibration in the air, and without realizing it, assumes responsibility for it. This unconscious act of emotional loyalty binds the child to the parent's pain. The child learns to carry what the parent cannot face, mistaking this burden for connection, believing that suffering together is a form of love. As adults, we feel the invisible residue of this inheritance. We experience guilt without clear cause, fear without present danger, sadness without specific memory. It becomes a background hum in the psyche, a subtle heaviness that follows us through relationships, work, and solitude. We over-apologize, overthink, and overcompensate. trying to fix something that cannot be fixed, because it was never truly ours to begin with. The mind searches for logical explanations, but the truth lives in the body, in the tightening of the chest, the fatigue of constant emotional labor, and the unspoken ache that refuses to name its source. The unconscious burden operates like a hidden script, quietly influencing our choices. A person raised in a lineage of suppressed grief may grow into an adult who fears expressing sadness. Someone from a line marked by humiliation may carry deep insecurity even while achieving success. The burden does not announce itself with clarity. It hides beneath our everyday emotions, shaping how we see ourselves and how much joy we allow. It whispers, "You must suffer to belong," and without awareness we obey, repeating the emotional language of generations past. Yet the body remembers everything. It stores the energy of what has been denied, the unshed tears, the swallowed words, the unacknowledged truths. This stored energy surfaces as anxiety, tension, or unexplained melancholy, urging us to listen. The unconscious burden demands not punishment but recognition. It asks to be seen, not carried. When we bring awareness to it, we begin to separate what is truly ours from what has been inherited. We learn that empathy does not mean absorbing another's pain, that love does not require self-erasure. Healing begins in that moment of clarity. It is the gentle realization that we do not have to hold what was never meant for us. We can honor our ancestors by freeing ourselves, by allowing the emotional stories that once defined them to find rest. Every generation that becomes conscious lightens the collective field. Through awareness, compassion, and the courage to feel, we release centuries of silence. To live without the unconscious burden is not to forget the past, but to transform it. It is to walk with the understanding that the pain you feel may not be your own, yet the healing can begin with you. In recognizing this truth, you no longer serve as the carrier of inherited sorrow. You become the alchemist of it, turning the weight of generations into the gold of awareness, and freeing both yourself and those who came before. Awareness is the quiet revolution of the soul. It begins not with noise or dramatic change, but with a simple recognition, the moment you pause and notice that the thoughts, reactions, and fears you call your own may not truly belong to you. So much of what defines human behavior is learned, absorbed, and imprinted long before one can consciously choose. We inherit not only the physical traits of our lineage, but also emotional habits, belief systems, and defense mechanisms that were once necessary for survival. These conditionings shape how we love, fear, and interpret the world. Yet beneath all of this lies something untouched, the authentic self, unbound by the weight of the past, waiting to be seen. Healing begins when the light of awareness falls upon the patterns that once ruled in silence. You begin to witness your reactions instead of being consumed by them. When anger rises, you see it not as an absolute truth, but as a memory of protection. When fear whispers, you recognize it as an echo of someone else's caution. Awareness allows space between stimulus and response, a sacred pause where consciousness can breathe. In that space, you reclaim your power from the automatic behaviors that once dictated your life. Most people live unconsciously, replaying emotional scripts inherited from their families. A parent's unspoken anxiety becomes the child's nervous system. A grandparent's scarcity mindset becomes the grandchild's obsession with control. These patterns repeat not because we are doomed, but because the unconscious seeks expression. It wants to be seen, understood, and integrated, Awareness interrupts this loop. It says, I see you and I choose differently. In that moment, what was once fate becomes freedom. Awareness is not about rejection of the past. It is about illumination. It doesn't erase conditioning overnight, but transforms our relationship with it. You begin to see your inner world as layers, the inherited beliefs on the surface, and beneath them, the deeper presence of the self. You learn to separate what was imposed by circumstance from what arises naturally from within. The guilt that once felt personal reveals itself as a family legacy. The fear that guided your choices unveils its origin in another's suffering. Through this understanding, the weight of unconscious inheritance begins to dissolve. True liberation is not the absence of pain, but the presence of clarity. Awareness brings light to the shadows, not to destroy them, but to integrate them. You start to see that your conditioning was never an enemy. It was a message, a map showing where the light of consciousness was needed most. Every triggered emotion becomes an invitation to wake up. Every uncomfortable pattern becomes an opportunity to choose awareness instead of reaction. This shift marks the beginning of emotional maturity, where you are no longer a prisoner of your past, but an observer of its influence. The more awareness deepens, the more you sense your authentic self beneath the noise. It is calm, unhurried, and vast. It does not fight for control or approval. It simply observes. From that place, forgiveness arises naturally, not as an effort, but as understanding. You see that those who conditioned you were themselves conditioned. The chain of unconsciousness stretches back through time, and your awareness becomes the moment it breaks. Through awareness, you no longer seek identity in your wounds. You stop confusing healing with fixing and begin to rest in being. What once felt like inner conflict now becomes inner clarity. You realize that awareness itself is the healing, the silent recognition that you were never broken, only hidden beneath layers of inherited emotion. Liberation is not found in becoming someone new, but in remembering who you were before the conditioning began whole, conscious, and free. True compassion is not about carrying another's pain. It is about seeing it clearly while remaining anchored in your own center. When it comes to a parent's suffering, this becomes one of life's most delicate lessons. The child, by nature, is empathetic and open. From the earliest moments, the child feels the emotional tone of the home, the sadness in the mother's eyes, the frustration in the father's silence, and interprets it as something to fix. The instinct is to absorb, to take on what hurts in hopes that love will be restored. Yet this innocent act often becomes the root of deep emotional confusion, where love and suffering are tangled into one experience. To understand a parent's pain is an act of awareness. To internalize it is an act of self-abandonment. Many children grow into adults who cannot tell the difference. They feel responsible for the emotional balance of others, constantly trying to soothe or rescue, believing that peace will come only when everyone else is healed. But empathy without boundaries turns love into burden. The heart that absorbs too much becomes heavy, drained, and resentful, not because it loved too deeply, but because it forgot that love must include oneself. When we look at a parent's pain with compassion, we see that it is not personal. It is the continuation of old stories of loss, fear, rejection, and longing that began long before we arrived. A parent's anger may mask their own unmet needs. Their withdrawal may hide the wounds of their own childhood. Seeing this truth allows for empathy, but the moment we start to believe it is our job to heal or carry it, we lose connection with our own truth. Compassion, in its highest form, does not require participation in another's suffering. It only requires presence, understanding, and acceptance of what is. Boundaries are not walls, they are expressions of self-respect. To say, "I see your pain, but I cannot carry it for you," is not cruelty, it is maturity. It honors both souls involved. Without boundaries, empathy becomes self-sacrifice, and love becomes codependence. When you set an emotional boundary with compassion, you allow the other person the dignity of their own journey. You acknowledge that healing cannot be outsourced, it must rise from within each person's own awareness. This balance between compassion and boundary begins with awareness of your emotional body. When you sense yourself absorbing someone else's feelings, tension, sadness, anxiety, pause. Ask yourself, is this mine to hold? Such a simple question creates space between your being and another's energy. In that space, you can love freely without losing your equilibrium. You can listen deeply, feel deeply, and yet remain whole. That is the essence of conscious empathy, love that does not drown. The world often glorifies selflessness, mistaking exhaustion for virtue. But there is nothing noble about erasing yourself in the name of love. The heart thrives when it can give and receive equally. Compassion without absorption honors this natural balance. It allows you to see your parents or anyone not as burdens to be carried, but as human beings shaped by their own struggles. You can understand them without merging with their wounds. You can feel their suffering without letting it define your emotional state. When compassion matures, it becomes spacious. It no longer seeks to fix, control, or save. It simply witnesses with open awareness and grounded love. In that witnessing, healing happens naturally, not through taking on another's pain, but through holding it in a field of presence that asks for nothing. This is the quiet power of true compassion. It liberates both the giver and the receiver, allowing love to exist without weight, connection without captivity, and empathy without self-loss. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as approval, as if letting go means agreeing with what was done. But true forgiveness is not an act of compliance, it is an act of liberation. It is the quiet release of the energetic chains that keep us bound to what hurt us. When we hold on to resentment, our spirit becomes tied to the very experiences we wish to escape. We replay memories like unfinished stories, hoping that by revisiting them, something will change. Yet nothing changes until we do. Forgiveness begins when we realize that clinging to pain does not protect us. It only prolongs the suffering that once began with someone else's wound. To forgive does not mean to forget or minimize the harm. It means acknowledging the pain fully without allowing it to dictate who we are. It is the moment when we reclaim ownership of our emotional space and stop letting the past occupy the present. The human heart cannot heal while it remains in battle with what has already happened. Forgiveness is the truce we make with reality, not because the past was fair, but because we deserve peace more than we need vindication. Every grievance carries an energetic thread that connects us to the source of our pain. Each time we revisit the wound with anger, we feed that thread with life. We become tied to the very people or events that once took our freedom. The paradox is that by refusing to forgive, we keep them close in our thoughts, our emotions, our bodies. Forgiveness, therefore, is not a gift to the other, When we release the grip of resentment, we retrieve lost fragments of our power. The process of forgiveness is not linear. It is not a single act of will, but a gradual unfolding of awareness. At first, we resist, believing that letting go would mean invalidating our pain. But as consciousness deepens, we see that the wound was never meant to be our identity. It was a passage, a teacher. The anger, though justified, becomes heavy to carry. The heart begins to crave lightness more than justice. In that shift, forgiveness naturally arises, not as a forced moral duty, but as a spontaneous act of inner freedom. Forgiveness also requires understanding. When you see that hurt people hurt others, something softens inside you. This does not excuse behavior, but it brings perspective. You begin to sense that those who caused you pain were themselves caught in unconscious cycles of suffering. Their actions came not from awareness, but from unhealed places within them. To forgive is to acknowledge this truth without romanticizing it, to recognize that they too were shaped by pain they did not know how to transcend. Through that understanding, empathy grows where bitterness once lived. There is a quiet strength in those who forgive. It is not weakness or surrender, but mastery, the mastery of one's own inner world. When you forgive, you no longer wait for an apology to set you free. You stop needing closure from the very hands that caused the break. You become your own healer, your own liberator. The past loses its authority, and you begin to live not as a victim of memory, but as the creator of new meaning. Forgiveness does not rewrite what happened, it rewires how you hold it. The memory remains, but its charge dissolves. What once felt like a chain becomes a lesson, a symbol of how far you have come. In forgiving, you end the energetic conversation with pain. You step out of the loop of reaction and enter the stillness of acceptance. And in that stillness, you discover what true freedom feels like, not the erasure of history, but the awakening of peace within it. Breaking the cycle is one of the most sacred acts a human being can undertake. It is the moment when awareness becomes an instrument of transformation, when you choose to stop repeating what has been unconsciously passed down through generations. Every family carries emotional patterns, stories of abandonment, control, silence, fear, or shame woven into its history like invisible threads. These patterns move quietly through time, shaping behaviors, relationships, and identities. Most people live unaware of them, reenacting the same dramas under new circumstances, believing they are making new choices when in truth, they are following old scripts. But when awareness dawns, something extraordinary happens. The cycle meets consciousness, and what was once destiny becomes possibility. To heal consciously means to pause the automatic repetition of inherited pain. It is to observe your reactions and ask, whose voice is this? You begin to recognize that the fear that stops you from speaking, the guilt that makes you overgive, the anger that erupts without reason, these are echoes of past generations. They are emotional codes programmed into your nervous system, once designed to protect your ancestors in their world of struggle. But you live in a different time, and what once served survival now limits your freedom. Awareness allows you to meet these inner voices not with judgment, but with curiosity. You no longer suppress them, you listen, learn, and release. Breaking the cycle does not mean rejecting your family or their history. It means honoring it by evolving it. You become the bridge between what was unconscious and what is now illuminated. When you choose to heal, you do not just free yourself, you shift the energy of the entire lineage. The pain that once moved through generations begins to lose momentum. The child who grows up under your awareness inherits not your wounds, but your wisdom. This is how healing ripples through time, one conscious act undoing centuries of unconsciousness. This journey is not comfortable. The patterns you challenge were built for survival, and breaking them can feel like betrayal. When you choose peace over chaos, silence over reaction, or truth over avoidance, a part of your conditioning resists. The old self, shaped by inherited defense mechanisms, clings to familiarity, but persistence transforms resistance. Every time you choose awareness instead of repetition, you carve a new neural and emotional pathway. You begin to live by choice rather than compulsion, and what once ruled you becomes something you rule with understanding. In breaking the cycle, you learn the art of detachment, not emotional coldness, but spiritual clarity. You see your parents not as figures who failed or harmed you, but as souls doing the best they could with what they knew. You realize that their pain was not their fault any more than yours is. Compassion replaces blame, and gratitude takes the place of resentment. Through this shift, you no longer fight the past, you integrate it. You take what was once a source of suffering and turn it into a foundation of strength. Every act of conscious healing is an act of rebellion against unconsciousness. Every time you choose to respond instead of react, to forgive instead of resent, you rewrite the family narrative. You become a living example that it is possible to be born from pain and still create peace. The same energy that once expressed itself as trauma now becomes wisdom, creativity, and love. You turn the inherited weight of suffering into the fuel of transformation. When you break the cycle, you not only heal yourself, you heal those who came before and those who will come after. You become the living proof that awareness can end what history began. The pain that once defined your lineage becomes the ground from which your power grows, and through your courage to see, feel, and transform, generations of silence finally find their voice, and the story of suffering becomes the story of awakening. And so, when you choose to heal, you are not merely healing yourself, you are healing the unseen hands that shaped you, and protecting the souls who will follow after you. You become the moment where pain turns into purpose, where silence becomes understanding, and where love finally learns to flow without condition. The courage to face what others could not is the quiet revolution of the spirit, a sacred vow that the story will no longer repeat through you. You are not the wound, you are the awareness rising from it. You are not the echo of the past, you are the voice that transforms it. And when you decide to live with consciousness, compassion, and truth, you do what generations before you could only dream of. You break the cycle, and in doing so, you set countless hearts free.